If showing up in the limelight makes you nervous, whether that be getting on a stage or speaking on your podcast or leading a workshop, this is the episode for you. I'm speaking with Linda Ugelow, the podcast host and author of Delight in the Limelight. She is incredible with everything she's sharing today, so I can't wait to get into this episode. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Hey, Linda, thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I am thrilled to be interviewing you today.
And I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh my gosh. Well, you sent me your amazing book, Delight in the Limelight, that we're going to be talking all about, which is also the name of your podcast. And it is what you talk about, all about feeling confident in the limelight. But before we get into all of that, I have a very important question for you. Since we are in the Podcast Cafe, what is your go-to coffee order?
Oh, I don't usually order out. I usually make at home, and I
Okay.
have to say, maybe with a little bit of embarrassment, that I go to decaf coffee instant, and I
Okay.
add a spoon of collagen and a spoon of mushroom mix.
Ooh. I love that. I
Yes.
love that. I normally have like a half shot of espresso in the afternoon but I need my coffee to get me through the day.
Yeah, yeah. I try to not be dependent on coffee.
Yeah.
When I go to conferences, when I travel, I have coffee every single day. But
Mhm.
at home, I try to either do half and half and half. I love cream, by the way. Love cream in my coffee. It's like,
Yes.
why drink it without it?
Yeah.
But, at home, I try to be flexible, and especially because I know for that coffee can raise your heart rate.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I always recommend if someone is doing something that feels high stakes for them, they cut back on caffeine
Mm.
because why add to that, pounding heart if that's something that you're dealing with a lot?
No, that's very true, and
Mhm.
that's kind of what we're talking about today. So, your book is great. You talk about your own experience getting on Periscope
Mhm.
and showing up every day in a way that made you feel nervous. And you really had to do a lot of self work to figure out what is it that makes me hate getting on camera? What makes my heart race? It's just me and my camera. What is making me so nervous? And now you help people get through that, figure out what their deeper problem is with, showing up. And that's what you do in your coaching and through your podcast and your book. So, why don't you tell us more about what Delight in the Limelight is?
It's what I believe, our human design. I do believe that, like, if you just look at children and you see how they love the attention that they get. Of course, we're saying, loving attention, nourishing attention. When if they're tulling on their feet, everyone's clapping, everyone's laughing. We are obsessed with watching children in their unself-consciousness. And then, a few years later, they may be on the playground, "Look at me, look at me."
Mhm.
They say for the 50th time hanging upside down on the monkey bars. It's like it is it is natural for us to be in a human community, especially a loving one, and feel like we feel safe. We feel free to express ourselves. And it's only later on because of our conditioning, whether that comes from our family experiences at home or in the educational system or in the church or elsewhere in the community, cultural values, that we start to lose that that unself-consciousness, where we start to become very self-conscious, inhibited, trying to fit in, do the right thing. We don't wanna get punished or hurt or ridiculed, or we hear messages like, "Don't stand out," or "Don't brag," "Be quiet, use your indoor voice, don't speak back unless spoken to," any number of these things that lead to the non-delight in the
Mm.
limelight.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was younger, I switched schools when I was in middle school in, like, 7th grade, I think,
Mm,
or maybe I was even younger than that, and it was so nerve-wracking for me. I was never really outgoing to start with, but that in itself made me so shy, and it took me until I studied abroad in college when I went to a different country, they spoke a different language, I didn't know anyone there, to finally break out of my shell and figure out, like, I had to advocate for myself, and
mhm.
now I'm very outgoing and social and, podcast all the time, but it really took a big life event for me to be able to use my voice and start speaking up for myself, which is what I love all of my clients to do. Anyone in the podcast field, I especially love helping women start podcasts because I think that we should all be using our voices now and more. And so I really love the message that you have to share. Can you tell us, about your story of how you got into this?
Well, you started the story off that I was on Periscope. I was trying
Mhm.
to build my following, my business as a coach. And I learned about this new technology, live streaming, and everyone said, "You gotta get on daily to build your following." And I found it terrifying, but I was determined because everyone said, "Oh, after, a few weeks, you'll feel comfortable, you'll feel confident." And it didn't work.
Mm.
It didn't work. I was managing my anxiety every day with jumping jacks, power poses, affirmations, meditation, deep breathing, all of these things, you name it, I tried it, different kind of mindset stuff, and everything helped for me to manage it. But it didn't get rid of the fear, and that was what was really peculiar. So I was able to get on with some reasonable degree of coherence speaking, but I always felt like I was hyperventilating a little bit out of breath, my heart was racing, and after 10 weeks of this, I went, "Wait a minute, isn't this supposed to be done with already?" And I thought, "I don't wanna manage this anymore. I just don't want it to be there." And that's when everything changed for me, because when I recognized that managing the fear and getting rid of the fear were 2 different things, that was a completely different paradigm for me.
Mm.
And it was something I couldn't find when I Googled. I was Googling every week, how to get over my fear of speaking, mindset shifts for getting over the fear of speaking, how to manage anxiety, all these things. And I got lots of anxiety management tools, but nothing showed me how to get over this, except for with enough time, you'll hopefully, maybe get to the other side. So I happen to have a master's degree in expressive arts therapy, movement studies. I have a background in psychology, a lot of self help. And I thought, you know what? You've gotta have something in your back pocket that's gonna help with this, so I made a long list. And one of the things on the list was something called focusing, and basically, it's a very simple idea that if you put a distress in your body, you feel where in your body this stress is, and you speak with it. So I closed my eyes to connect with the fear, and I asked if the fear could talk, what would it say? And what came back was, "You're gonna be attacked."
Mm.
And then suddenly I had memories of when I was a kid being attacked by my 2 older sisters who were jealous of me every time mom put me in the center of attention, saying, "Why can't you girls be more like Linda?" Because I was the good one in the family and they were naughty. And they hated that. Of course, they hated that. And I hated it too because I knew whenever she said that, what was going to happen next, which was them chasing me, kicking me, saying, "Shut up," calling me stupid. And then it was like, well, duh, of course I don't feel comfortable being the center of attention because I learned it was dangerous to be the center of attention. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, that makes so much sense that things that happened to us in the past can impact how we feel about putting ourselves out. And it was like the world opened up to me. It's like, Where else did I feel demeaned, diminished? Like times I was bullied, times that I felt like I was on the outside, not I wasn't part of the cool kids. I was always on the outside looking in. I thought no one's interested in me. My father saying things like, "I'm not interested in what you're interested in, Linda." Or mom saying, "Why an A minus and not an A plus?" This pressure to be perfect, or and mom always wanting me to act a particular way in public, and I would have to wear clothes that I felt really uncomfortable in. She loved plaid kilts for some reason, and I hated them, and I felt so embarrassed. I was like, it was cringing every time I was forced to wear them in public, and,
Mhm.
those so all these things that lead us to believe that we're not okay, that people aren't interested in us, we're not good enough, or smart enough, or young enough, or pretty enough, or thin enough, or mature enough, or whatever it is that we come to believe about ourselves, that kind of grow together in this weave or glom that becomes this unidentifiable anxiety. When we're in front of people, it gets triggered from all these experiences.
Yeah.
So once I realized, Linda, you got stuff, I was able to take all those tools that I had written down on my list and try them out and see what would move the needle. And I can't say that any particular one thing moved the needle, but I can say that after 5 days, I was never afraid again.
Wow. That's what I think everyone wants. You share a lot of those tools in the book. You talk about tapping, which is something
Mhm.
I've tried before in the past, but after reading, I was like, let me try this again. It's something that I think you just have to be consistent with, right?
Well, I think that you need to be using it enough in order for whatever is distressing you to feel resolved. Because what happens with tapping is that for people who don't know what it is, you're tapping on points on your face, which are connected with 9 different meridian points.
Mhm.
And the science behind it suggests, and who knows whether this is true, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, but my understanding is that what we're doing is we're interrupting the pattern in which this memory is living inside us. Because unaddressed, we tell this story the same way over and over. We experience it the same way over and over. And what we want to do is come at it from a more mature, older, wiser position, so we can look back with acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the distress, the feelings, but also to introduce other angles to the experience, such as what we would have wished for, which is so important. Because the reason why things stick with us is because they haven't yet been resolved.
Mm.
They weren't able to be resolved at the time because we didn't have the parent, teacher, mentor, friend that had the tools to help us through. So either we got erroneous or inadequate information, or we would just figured things out on our own to help us navigate that time. But a lot of times it was functional for the moment, but maybe not functional for our lives.
Yeah.
For instance, we hide. We learned it was safer to hide. So the big question is, when did you learn it was safer to hide? That will point to those places that need to be resolved. So that's why it's important to in EFT to look at what you wish for, but also what you would like to be able to let go of and what you need in order to be able to let go. And what you appreciate and love about how you already are, and maybe even the abilities and capabilities that you have in spite of that, or even because of it.
Yeah.
I've had clients, for instance, who are really good at handling difficult people because of their narcissistic father or their abusive brother. But they are maybe even in male dominated industries because they know how to handle this.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know what life lessons are gonna help you later
Exactly,
on.
exactly. So yes, EFT is a very important uh, core piece of healing tool that I like to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could give some advice to anyone, so one thing that I mention a lot is when we're recording our podcast episodes, I think across the board, a lot of my clients have told me, like, what if no one listens? Or am I even the person that should be talking about this? Or I'll have inquiries from people who want to start a podcast and they said, I've been thinking about this for like 3 years now. I think it's finally time to bring this to life. And what I always ask them is, okay, what's holding you back? And normally it's themselves, but normally it's also just being afraid of showing up, being heard, being seen, the fact that maybe no one will listen. What advice do you have when it comes to this? And throughout your clients, I'm sure you've seen this too when they come to you, right?
Yeah. Well, what if nobody listens? Well, mostly they won't at the beginning.
Hmm.
Unless you already have a platform, unless you have people that you can tell it to come listen, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in fact, starting small and being small is beautiful because then you get to practice without doing it in front of a lot of people. If you make mistakes or your first podcasts are not gonna be as good as your 50th podcast.
Right.
That's just a given, and so allow yourself to be a beginner. Allow yourself to not have the visibility today that you're gonna have in a year.
Yeah.
That's fine. So that's not a problem. I think that it's funny because that you say that because I have a lot of clients who say, "I'm afraid someone's gonna come on and be mean," like when they post on social media, and I say, "Number 1 is you wanna try to get people to even see it." So don't worry about people being mean yet until you get more visibility. Number 1 is, like, how can you get what you're saying in front of more people? So, that to me is a little different than feeling like, "I don't know if I'm the best person to say this. Other people are better." I think actually when I this has come to me more recently with some clients that I had a client on my podcast. I do some coaching on my podcast. We'll do a coaching episode. If someone says, "Oh, I've got a speaking gig coming up and I'm actually nervous," I say, "Come on, I'll do a free coaching on my podcast." So I did have someone on my podcast recently, and his thing was he had a lot of friend groups, but he was never on the inside of any of them.
Mm.
He had the jocks, he had the nerds, he had the drama club, the musicians, but he never felt himself that he was on the inside. What does that do for us? And it also for moving into new schools. You feel like, well, number 1, nobody really wants to listen to me because 'cause they're listening to those cool kids on the inside, or those people are the ones who should do it because they're more comfortable, they already have the visibility. Who am I? So these are the things that are really, really important to clear away, and I wanna caution you, if something like this comes up, if you're listening and you say, "Oh, that's nothing. That was so long ago," or "That's just a small thing." Don't do that because anything that hangs on that we remember can have a long-lasting impact for better or for worse. And you may as well clear it away. Everybody has stuff. There's nothing wrong with having stuff. We all have it. It's our responsibility to address it so that it doesn't keep us back from doing the things we want to do. So if you do feel uncomfortable getting onto a podcast, take some time to journal about it. Like, what am I afraid of? What am I not feeling enough of? And then look back, when do I think that happened before? For whom did I not feel like I was good enough? Was it for my classmates? Was it for my father or my mother or my sibling or grandpa or the someone at church or temple? Where is that stuff? Because that stuff is going to cling on you. You can ignore it, but it's not gonna ignore you. It's gonna stick around, and it's gonna trigger you until it gets your attention. This is why I think of our fear as not the villain, but it's the gift, because it gets our attention to point to the things that have yet to be resolved.
Mm. That's such a good way to think about it. And so once these things have been brought to our attention, let's say, like you were feeling it's not safe to show up and be seen. When you started showing up on stages or in front of clients or on podcasts, what did you do then? Did you step into another persona, or what advice do you have there?
Well, it's interesting because I have 40 years of experience being on stage as a performer with a women's world music group.
Mm,
So I actually had a lot of tools on stage presence.
mhm,
I've been on more than 500 stages with this group around the world. So I know what it's like to like stand on stage and just hold the attention of the audience. We used to practice receiving the love, the nourishment, the it's really a gift to be handed the space to take up, to be in the limelight. And we as a group, we used to practice that consciously. And I was just looking on our old I'm not in the group anymore. I left in right before the pandemic. But just yesterday I was on our website and I was looking at this one photograph where we're in Morocco on this big festival stage. And we're the one of us, it wasn't me, but someone had her hand on her heart. And the rest of us were just like beaming. And I felt that energy of receiving the attention. So I already knew what it was like to do that. And what I discovered was that all of that was able to be utilized once that fear was cleared away.
mm.
That very next week when I continued to do my periscopes every week. In fact, I went on to do another 200 after I got over my fear, which was hallelujah. So, I remember the following week, I was running around doing errands and I wanted to rush back home before it got dark because I didn't have any lights at the time, for making videos, so I wanted the daylight. And I remember pressing broadcast, coming on and saying to everyone like, "Hey, I just want to let you know how grateful I am to get to come on and live stream with you all because after a hectic day of running around, I can turn on the camera and just relax."
Wow. Much
Yeah.
different than when you started.
Much different, much
Yeah.
different, and that's why I say once the clear fear was cleared away, those abilities that I had in another place in my life were able to just, like, be present. I was able to just call upon it, and that's one of the things I teach in my accelerator program in Comfy on Camera is how to relax on camera, how to connect with ourselves, how to receive that imagine and receive that the people who are there are sending us love and delight and interest and respect and admiration or curiosity, but benevolent things.
Mhm.
And we practice just receiving. We practice just relaxing. We practice relating in that way. So every time the camera comes on, it's like right into ourselves.
Yeah.
It brings, and that's what I love about performing at its best. And I talk about this in the last chapter, like what makes a peak experience. Because when we are in front of other people, it has the potential to bring us into a focus that has a potential to bring us into a deeper place inside ourselves for the benefit of all.
Yeah. Yeah. What we have to say, as you say in your book, is meant to be heard. There's a reason we have this calling to, speak up, be on stage, be on podcasts, whatever it is. Like our message is meant to be heard if we have that message to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that you just mentioned of like delighting in the limelight and how that's really what we all want. We all want to just feel comfortable speaking in front of a crowd or in front of a small group, whatever it is. I often see that people will show up, even if they are confident, they'll show up, and when they start speaking, their voice changes,
Mm.
or they start saying a lot, or these filler words, which you have chapters about in your book too. I'm curious if you could tell us more about maybe why this happens and what we can do about it.
We have, first of all, everybody has vocal habits.
Mhm.
that we pick up from people around us. I think that filler words actually we learn from school. This
Interesting.
is why. There can be other reasons. One thing about filler words is that it fills the space, so people won't interrupt us if they know that we're still kinda working on it. In school, though, if you are called upon and you don't really have the answer yet, you don't wanna show that you don't know the answer because then you're gonna get a bad grade. That's a whole other thing about school, which I can rant about, which but well, let's do the filler words. So by saying, it's a way that we are, number 1, showing that we're there. We're there. We're not kind of like struck silent. And it also allows ourselves to take a moment to think. I mean, you'll see this in schools everywhere. So I think it's very much, if it wasn't learned in school, it's reinforced in school.
Yeah.
I also do know that people have used it, as I said, to avoid being interrupted by other people who are very quick to jump in. I used to be a jumper inner. In fact, my sister and I used to jump in on each other's sentences and finish it for each other, which was fine for us because we kind of enjoyed it and we're used to it. But I had a lot of people tell me, Linda, don't do that to me. Let me finish my sentence. And in fact, I say it to other people too, sometimes, when I feel they're jumping in on me. So if we want to get rid of filler words, I have my own way that I like to do it. I know that if people go to Toastmasters, they have someone who's standing there and they're counting how many you have. I personally would hate that
Me too. Me
because
too.
because already, why would I wanna be judged that way? And of course, there's doing it in a helpful way. They think this is a helpful thing, but I feel like there's a better way. The better way is that we become so enamored in our vocal production, and I'll say a little bit more about this, in the way we speak dynamically, in the feeling of our voice, in the way we want to express the words as they come out, that is not part of that sentence. So what do I mean by being a tour? I like this idea, this image of being a tour guide. So when we speak, we want to help our listener understand us better. That means we want them to be able to understand our diction. So we want to speak clearly enough, not mumble. We don't want to speak so fast that they can't catch the sound of our words. I know I used to, on certain sounds, I used to go into something called vocal fry like this.
Mhm.
And I would do that on words that had R towards the end, like Bedford is where I live, and I would say Bedford. For decades, I said Bedford. I live in Bedford. And then when I was writing my book and I was writing the chapter on the breath we take and the sounds we make, and I was helping people really learn to love the sounds that we make and recognize how amazing it is what we can do. This is our instrument, that I realized that I was closing off my throat on that sound. It's a very common sound. Her, sir, murmur, deserve, heard, all these. And I used to say them all like heard, sir, her,
Mm.
because I didn't realize, oh yeah, there's a vowel in that syllable. What is that vowel? And I went, oh, and when I started to just play with it like a child might play, a 2 or 3-year-old would just go, burr, 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 mur, 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 mur. And all of a sudden, I had this whole new syllable sound, vowel sound that I could make. And every time it came around, I felt so proud that I could say, I live in Bedford. And it
Mm.
sounded like, whoa, that sounds so smooth. And when I started to look at my diction this way, and I call it delicious diction, people started to say, my gosh, Linda, I love the sound of your voice. I could listen to your voice all day. And I went, ooh, I like that. And I think this is what is missing from people who are doing podcasting. They don't realize what they're leaving on the table by not paying attention to enjoying building the skills the pleasure of their actual voice and what their voice is capable of doing, because we can express ourselves in so many different ways. Now, as you're listening to me, you may notice how I emphasize words, and I do that purposely because I feel it's when we emphasize words that we tell our listener what we think is important. When we give some space around a word, that helps them understand that this word is something I want them to hear. And if we're going to say something, we may as well make it hearable. Every word deserves to be heard.
I love that. I really do love that. I think a lot of people aren't aware of these things until they start doing the work or work with someone like you, Linda. What are some ways that maybe we can audit our own voice or the words we say, the noises we make, all of these things?
Well, if we want to audit, listen back and just listen. Am I going into vocal fry?
Hmm.
Are there words that I'm kind of mumbling over? Am I Some people may be very fast speakers. Now, there's nothing really wrong with speaking fast as long as you speak in phrases. But there are some people who speak so fast and they're speaking very monotone and they don't fall into any kind of phrases at all or group words together. And so you can't really follow it.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard for the listener. So if you do that, think about phrasing, punctuation. Am I speaking in full sentences? That's one of the great things about podcasting. And if you're new to podcasting, this is a fabulous place to practice.
Totally. Yes.
Totally. And if you're old to podcasting, it's still a fabulous place to practice all of these things. I would also recommend taking one sentence and playing around with it in different ways. So you can, let's say, I'll take that sentence. You can take that sentence and play around with it in all different kinds of ways. You can take that sentence and play with it in all kinds of different ways. You can take that sentence and play around with it in all different kinds of ways. So I just said it in lots of different ways, emphasizing different words.
Hmm.
And when you become aware that you can do this, then as the thoughts are coming through your brain, out your mouth, you can choose in that moment how it feels like it wants to be expressed that day. And
Yeah.
even if you say the same sentence tomorrow, you might choose to say it in a slightly different way.
Hmm.
You might use different tones in your voice. So this is like dynamic speaking. There's delicious diction, there's dynamic speaking, and we can use all of these things to become more compelling and more creative
Yeah.
and more what other C words? I'm trying to think of other C words. Convincing,
Convincing.
credible,
Yes. Yes. Those are
confident.
good. Confident. Yes.
Yeah. Show
Those are
your
good.
competence, your credibility, because also like okay, here's another thing that you want to monitor yourself for. Some people always speak with an uptone. So
Mm.
they think, okay, I'm Linda Ugelow and I'm a speaking confidence coach and I have a book called Delight in the Limelight and I also have a program called the Delight in the Limelight Accelerator and I work with private clients. I mean like it's like for your brain, it's like, please change, make a change. And so you want to make sure that you're not saying everything always in the same way.
Mm.
That puts people to sleep. Now, if you have a podcast about sleep, that might be a good thing, or meditation, that might be a good thing. But not if you want to capture people's attention.
Right. Right. And I think most importantly is just to start with these things, like how you started with Periscope. It took you taking that first step. So if someone is listening and they want to know how to perfect this, step one is always, always, always just to start and perfect as you go. And so I'm sure people are wondering, you have your book, you have your podcast, but you also offer coaching. Can you tell us more about that?
I do private coaching with people. Most of the people who come to me for private coaching, I will say not everyone, but they're either professionals or they're managers or in the C-suite. So they are time is of the essence, and they can't do anything extra than what I we have our hour that week, and that's what they show up for. But I often, if people have the capabilities, if they are entrepreneurs, if they're business owners, I do recommend doing this work in a group,
Mm.
because I feel that's where we get, not only we get to clear the fear, and when we do that with other people, we realize that we are not alone. You are not alone. There are, I don't know, 70% of our population is stricken with some level of anxiety or nerves, and it's just a fact of our culture. So let's do this together, because when we invariably, when you see other people who are dealing with the same thing, you look at them, you say, "They sound wonderful. They look wonderful. Maybe I do too."
Hmm.
You know, it's kind of like maybe I'm you when we see how the capabilities of other people, it's often easier for us to see those capabilities in ourselves, and it also allows us to de-shame, to let go of the blame or the feeling bad about ourselves. "Oh, I don't want anyone to know I have this anxiety." But when you see these other people do too, it's like, "Oh, okay, it's not that big a deal." And then we can celebrate and revel in the transformation. It's also wonderful in that, as I mentioned, comfy on camera, I help people like watch themselves on video without cringing or make friends with a lens, that these processes where we get to practice presence, we get to practice what it is to speak in front of other people. And not only that, but hear back. I'm a big believer in positive reflections as opposed to constructive criticism, because we need to know what we're already good at, because everybody is good at being them. And as we reflect back to each other what we see as their essence and what we like and appreciate, all of a sudden people will say, "Oh, you do? Oh, I'll do that again." It's like, "Can't wait for tomorrow's video. I get to do that again and get all this dopamine that I'm getting from other people, and the oxytocin." And thirdly is that we do this vocal work that is so much fun in a group. I mean, it's fun one-on-one too. I mean, I work vocally with all my private clients, but in a group, it's hysterically funny. It's like being a kid again. It's reclaiming that joy of speaking. And that's what I think Delight in the Limelight is about, is recovering that joy of speaking that is supposed to be there in our human design.
Absolutely. What do you have to say to people who say that they hate the sound of their own voice or can't even listen back to themselves?
Yes, well, that's why the module is called Love and Transform the Sound of Our Voice, and we explore our dislike, and we learn to love it. We learn to appreciate it. We learn to Everybody does. Everybody does. I've never had somebody who after focusing their loving attention and getting to play around with their voice, that says, "Oh, this isn't fun." I mean, everyone says, "Oh my god, I feel like I'm rediscovering what my voice is." And in truth, as a 2 and a 3-year-old, you loved making sounds. You loved the sound of your voice. It was joy and delight for you, and it's your birthright, and it's about reclaiming it. So, yes, you can change the sound of your voice, and you can love it even as you're changing it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's what people definitely need to hear, right? You can change what you don't like about your voice. It just takes practice. And working with you, Linda, you will be the one that can help them positively change that. So I really appreciate everything that you've shared today. Is there anything else that you want to share before I get into my last final questions for you?
I would like to encourage everybody to love and accept where they are on their journey, and know that they're they have permission to celebrate where they are. Even if they're just thinking about starting a podcast, that's fabulous.
Mm,
Because
I
a lot of
agree.
people won't even get there. They won't even consider it. So you are a minority. You are one of the few that is willing to put yourself out there. And in fact, I think it goes beyond, if I may insert this little thing about AI. I think AI is listening to us. And if you want AI to hear your thoughts, your higher thoughts, your deeper thoughts, then put yourself out there so you can be part of whatever this revolution that we're undergoing now is part of, that you can make your stamp by being visible.
I agree. And everyone always says that they wish they started sooner, right? I'm sure you hear that all the time in this work. Everyone wishes they started bettering themselves sooner, starting their podcast sooner, getting on stages sooner. And that just feeds into that. AI is a whole nother layer that we all have to jump on board. As sad as it is, or as happy as it is, or however you feel about AI, we do have to jump on board to be a part of this revolution that you're speaking about.
Mhm. Yeah. And at the same time, we can't be where we're not. So love and accept yourself where you are in your journey,
Yeah,
and enjoy the ride.
I agree. I agree. Well, Linda, I have a couple questions for you. I call this my rapid fire section. So my first question for you is, do you remember the first podcast that you listened to, or the first podcast that like left an impact on your life?
I don't remember the first podcast that I listened to, but I remember the first podcast I spoke on as a
Oh,
guest.
okay. Yeah.
And I remember how mortified when I got off because she asked me a question and I spoke for 30 minutes. And then she said, "Okay, well that's all we have time for today."
Oh no.
And
It
I thought,
happens.
"Whoops." No, I'd never occurred to me that, "Oh, this could be a conversation. We could go back and forth. I could speak in smaller, bits. So if she wanted to go in a different direction, we could go in a different direction." So that was very impactful for me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, the faux
That's
pas.
so funny. How long ago was that?
That was in 2016.
Okay. Okay, so I get that, I get that. I have people come on my podcast that have never been on podcasts before, and either they come to me letting me know, and they're like, "I'm so nervous," and I'm like, "You're fine, everything's gonna be fine," or they do something similar where they go on, like, a long story, and I try to reel it back in.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yep,
That's
yep.
funny.
But as I said, we gotta start somewhere, and you can't get to your second podcast until you do your first.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I have 2 more questions. My next question is, what is the most valuable piece of advice you've ever heard about podcasting?
For me, it would have been as a podcast host, and when I first started my first podcast, which was called Women Inspired, and I did it as a TV show at my local cable TV station, and it happened really quickly. Because I had decided I wanted to be on TV, and I looked around for some local TV stations, couldn't find anything for women or business, entrepreneurship, and I called my local station, I said, "Is this something I can do there?" And they said, "Sure, come in tomorrow, we'll talk about it." Well, we had a 20-minute conversation, and in that 20 minutes, I was gonna start the following week. I went, "Holy smokes, okay, what am I gonna name it? How do I do this?" I didn't know anything, so I got on. I think I Googled something about, someone mentioned Terry, she was on NPR.
Terry Gross?
Thank you. She had a podcast that she was on where she talked about how she thinks about podcast hosting or interview hosting. That was the best advice, and the piece that stood out for me is how when you're hosting, you are there as the ears of your listener. And so if your guest is saying something like an acronym, and you might know what it is, but your audience does not, you say, "Oh, not everyone knows what that means. Can you explain that further?"
Mhm.
So that you're always listening in as a host, or you're guiding it, thinking about, how is my audience listening to this, and what would they be asking? What would they like to know? What would be helpful for them?
I love that piece of advice. I think that as podcasters, we can have an ego around it and want to seem as smart or smarter than the person that we are hosting, interviewing. I think that it is really important to have that beginner mindset. Even if you know the answer, like you're just saying right now, ask, ask, because not everyone is going to know the answer as well. So That's really great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And my last question to you is, what is the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself through this whole process of podcasting?
For me, it would be that I am on a quest to understand what does it mean to be naturally me. That through my decades of being anxious speaking in public, and it wasn't just like being on a stage. Oh, for instance, I was a performer, but I hated having to introduce a song.
Mhm.
So it wasn't just about, being on a stage, but even being in conversations or speaking up at a party to tell a story, that there was always part of me that was feeling inhibited and shy and self-conscious. That getting to be on podcasts was a journey that allowed me to always ask, and I would come in oftentimes with this intention. I'm going to see, what does it mean to be myself? So that really in the last 10 years, I feel like I've discovered like who I am as an expressive personality, how I like to express myself, what my energy is like. And I feel like I'll probably be doing that for the rest of my life, like discovering who I am and what I'm like, and enjoying that that self-discovery.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast cafe, Linda. I'll put the link to your book as well as your podcast and your social media links in the show notes. What should people know about your program and how can they find more details?
Well, I realized that I said some words about my accelerator. I don't even have a sales page up about it. I was thinking, should I should I be doing that? But you can, if you want to continue the conversation, I would say go to delightinthelimelight.com, where you can find the book. You can also get resources. It comes to my website. You can ask a question. There's a place for you to message me. You can download a free speaker preparation checklist, which I always use and I invite all my clients and students to use before they have to speak somewhere, because there are ways that we can prepare ourselves beyond what the words we're actually going to say,
Mhm.
just to be focused, grounded, and energized. So I would say, yeah, go to delightinthelimelight.com and and say hi.
Perfect. I'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Linda. I've learned a lot from this conversation, from your book, from your podcast. So I really appreciate you putting together these resources to help more people delight in the limelight. Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind the scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.